The sound of marching boots thunders through the dirt roads of a small Indian village. Dust swirls around as British soldiers, red coats gleaming under the fierce sun, drive a line of silent laborers forward. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings, faint, trembling, defiant. The officer in charge adjusts his gloves, his eyes cold and detached, as if cruelty were simply routine. A mother clutches her child, her face streaked with sweat and disbelief. This is not a battle. It is an execution of spirit. Beneath the banner of empire, humanity has been forgotten. The British Empire promised order and progress, yet its hands were soaked in the suffering of millions. What truth did they bury beneath the glory of their flag? Morning comes, but it brings no peace. The fields once alive with laughter now lie barren, trampled under the boots of occupation. Villagers are forced to rebuild what was burned, not for themselves, but for the empire that destroyed it. Grain that should feed their children is loaded onto wagons bound for distant ports. Hunger tightens its grip as the overseers count and command, their voices slicing through the air like whips. This is how control begins, not with war, but with hunger. A world turned upside down where loyalty is measured in obedience, and silence becomes survival. In London, thousands of miles away, the empire celebrates its prosperity. Grand halls filled with light, polished marble floors, and champagne glasses clinking to the rhythm of pride. Politicians speak of progress and trade, of uplifting the natives and the glory of civilization. No one mentions the hunger, the prisons, the lash. The colonies exist only as lines on a map, symbols of power, not people. In that golden reflection of empire, truth has no place. It is painted over by wealth and self-deception, a portrait of humanity lost in its own grandeur. Back in India, famine has become a weapon. Crops rot under taxes too heavy to pay, and starving families watch as soldiers escort shipments of grain to ports. The empire's officials call it efficiency, but the air smells of death. In the stillness of night, people gather in silence, whispering prayers for rain, for mercy, for an end. Children cry not from pain, but from emptiness, the kind that no tears can fill. And through it all, the empire writes reports of order and progress, blind to the bones beneath its success. In the empire's archives, the truth is carefully folded into silence. Reports vanish, witnesses disappear, and the atrocities are rewritten as administrative actions. Yet whispers endure, carried by survivors, passed down through generations like forbidden songs. Every scar, every unmarked grave tells the story they tried to erase. For empires do not fall when they lose battles. They fall when truth finally speaks. And in the echo of the forgotten, the truth is stirring, waiting to be heard. The night no longer sleeps in silence. In hidden corners of villages and cities, whispers begin to move like wind through dry grass. Farmers, clerks, and soldiers, once bound by fear, now speak of unity, of a day when the empire's grip might loosen. A single idea, fragile yet unstoppable, begins to spread. Freedom. It moves not with swords, but with stories carried in secret meetings and coded letters. The empire calls it treason. The people call it hope. From Bengal to Punjab, from the coastlines to the hills, the air thickens with something new, the heartbeat of rebellion. The empire responds with fear disguised as control. Printing presses are seized, voices silenced, gatherings banned. But words have already escaped, carried by travelers, sung by workers, hidden in the verses of poets. In every colony, a new rhythm begins to echo, not of obedience, but of resistance. The people begin to see through the illusion of British justice. The empire's strength, once unshakable, now trembles under the weight of its own lies. The world is beginning to listen. In Africa, the story is the same. Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, lands taken, divided, and renamed under banners of order. Yet within them, the spirit of the people refuses to die. They sing forbidden songs at dusk, telling stories of ancestors who once roamed free. The empire builds prisons of iron, but cannot cage memory. And in the rhythm of drums and the whisper of wind, rebellion begins to breathe. Once more, not all who serve the empire do so willingly. Among the ranks of British soldiers, some begin to see what their orders truly mean. Letters home grow heavy with doubt. "We were told we bring peace," one writes. "But all I see is hunger and ash." The empire's moral armor begins to crack, not from the outside, but from within. Conscience becomes the quietest form of rebellion. And sometimes the most dangerous. The British Empire stands vast and glittering, but the cracks are spreading. From the factories of Manchester to the rice fields of Bengal, truth is leaking through the walls of silence. The same empire that ruled half the world is being haunted by the half it tried to forget. The stories of rebellion are still small, whispers carried in the wind. But whispers, when multiplied by millions, become a storm. And the storm is coming. The year is 1857. In the garrisons of northern India, a single spark sets the empire ablaze. Soldiers ordered to bite cartridges greased with animal fat, forbidden by their faith, refuse. The punishment is swift, the outrage unstoppable. Within days, the rebellion spreads like wildfire. Villagers rise with farming tools, old soldiers take up rifles, and temples become sanctuaries of revolution. The empire, drunk on power, is caught unprepared. The cry that once whispered through the night now thunders across the land. No more chains. Cities once ruled by silence now ring with the sound of defiance. In Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow, rebellion surges through narrow streets and open fields alike. The empire retaliates with unmatched brutality. Villages burned, families slaughtered, captives executed without trial. Yet the rebels fight on, driven not by victory, but by dignity. They are farmers and laborers, clerks and soldiers, standing shoulder to shoulder against an empire that once seemed immortal. The British call it mutiny. The people call it freedom's birth cry. Across Africa, the echoes of India reach distant shores. From the Ashanti Kingdom to the plains of Kenya, people begin to see the empire's mask for what it is. Control dressed as civilization. Chiefs refuse treaties, farmers abandon colonial plantations, and women lead marches through the dust-choked streets. The empire's answer is the same: prisons, guns, and blood. But rebellion is no longer a single spark. It is a chorus rising from every stolen land. The sun that once never set on the British Empire begins to tremble at its own horizon. Back in London, news of revolt spreads like a plague through the halls of Parliament. Newspapers twist stories of native savagery to justify vengeance. But beneath the headlines, unease grows. Some whisper that the empire's cruelty has birthed its own destruction. Still, the government doubles down, sending more troops, building more prisons, silencing more truths. For every rebellion crushed, another begins to breathe. The empire, desperate to appear eternal, cannot see that it is already dying from within. The rebellion of 1857 ends in blood. Villages lie in ruins, rivers run red, and thousands hang from the gallows. But though the empire reclaims the land, it cannot reclaim the hearts it tried to break. The people have seen the truth. That power built on fear cannot last forever. Across continents, that truth continues to burn quietly and endlessly. Empires may rebuild their walls, but once a people learn to speak, silence can never return. After the bloodshed, the empire changes its face. No longer the roaring conqueror, it becomes the patient teacher. Schools rise where gallows once stood. English replaces native tongues. History books are rewritten, not to remember but to forget. Children learn of the empire's benevolence, of the Queen's mercy, of a world improved by British order. The real past is erased, replaced with polished lies that shine like truth. Through education, the empire begins its most powerful conquest, the colonization of the mind. In Africa, the same lesson spreads. Missionaries preach obedience wrapped in faith. Schools teach children to despise their own language, their own skin. A new generation grows believing they are inferior, grateful to be saved. The chains are invisible now, forged not from iron but from ideas. The empire has learned that it need not burn villages when it can burn identity instead. And so it does, methodically, patiently, completely. The empire's propaganda grows sophisticated. In London, newspapers boast of progress in the colonies. Photographs show schools, railways, smiling faces. Carefully chosen images masking the despair beyond the frame. Writers and politicians shape a world where empire is charity and conquest is destiny. The truth is not destroyed. It is drowned beneath the noise of lies. The empire's greatest weapon is not its army, but its story. And it tells that story beautifully. But not all are fooled. In libraries and temples, hidden corners of universities, a quiet rebellion of thought begins to stir. Scholars, poets, and workers rediscover their roots. They begin to question the lessons taught to them, to reclaim the stories of their ancestors. Words once used to enslave begin to awaken. Across India and Africa, a new kind of battle begins. A war of memory. The empire controls the body, but the soul has begun to remember. By the dawn of the 20th century, the empire stands at its peak, vast, glittering, and hollow. The people it rules are beginning to think differently. Beneath the calm surface, quiet minds sharpen into weapons. The classroom becomes the new battlefield. The educated become the new rebels. The empire believes it has conquered hearts, but it has only taught its enemies how to write their own freedom. What began with muskets now continues with words. Sharper, wiser, unstoppable. From the ashes of rebellion rises a new kind of strength, quiet, unyielding, and rooted in faith. The people have learned that guns can be silenced, but conscience cannot. A generation once taught to obey now begins to lead. They refuse to answer violence with violence, believing that truth itself can wound the empire deeper than any bullet. Across India, Africa, and the Caribbean, marches replace wars, and silence becomes defiance. The empire, once almighty, now trembles before the courage of the unarmed. The power of empire begins to crumble, not in battlefields, but in hearts. Across the colonies, movements of unity rise. In Ghana, students gather under moonlight, whispering of self-rule. In South Africa, miners strike for dignity. In India, millions march for salt, for freedom, for respect. Every act of peace exposes the empire's violence, every calm face a mirror reflecting its hypocrisy. The British call it unrest. The world begins to call it justice. The empire's newspapers no longer tell the whole story. Images of peaceful marches of soldiers striking down unarmed crowds begin to leak across the world. Britain's moral mask begins to crack. In cafes and universities, people start to question, not the colony's loyalty, but their own conscience. The colonized have become the teachers now, showing the world what courage looks like when stripped of power. The empire still rules the seas, but it can no longer rule the soul. Fear no longer works. The prisons fill, yet the marches continue. Every leader jailed gives rise to 10 more. The empire, desperate to maintain control, cannot comprehend that its subjects no longer see themselves as subjects at all. What once was empire now becomes burden, too heavy to carry, too costly to conceal. The people stand not as rebels or slaves, but as equals, demanding a truth that can no longer be denied, the right to exist free. By the mid-20th century, the tide has turned. The empire that once ruled oceans now sinks beneath its own weight. India gains independence, soon followed by nations across Africa and the Caribbean. The Union Jack still flies, but now over a fading dream. For centuries, Britain built its greatness on silence and subjugation. Now, those voices once silenced sing their histories aloud. The empire is ending, not in flames, but in awakening. For the first time, the sun sets on British rule and rises on a world that finally remembers itself. The British Empire collapses not with thunder, but with silence. One by one, the colonies break free, and the once mighty empire becomes a memory of smoke and shame. In London, politicians speak of peaceful transition and mutual benefit, but the truth is carved into the lands they left behind. Famines, partitions, borders drawn with careless hands. As the Union Jack lowers across continents, the world begins to see what lay beneath its shadow. Independence has come, but freedom will take longer to heal. In the newly free nations, celebration soon gives way to struggle. The empire had taken more than land. It had fractured identity, faith, and unity. Borders drawn in boardrooms turned neighbors into enemies. Economies built on servitude now stand hollow. Yet, even through chaos, hope survives. People plant new flags, rebuild new schools, write new constitutions. For the first time, they begin to tell their own stories. The world that empire silenced is finding its voice again. Raw, uncertain, but unbroken. Back in Britain, pride turns uneasy. Streets once decorated with imperial parades grow quiet. Veterans speak in half whispers, unsure if they served justice or cruelty. Archives are sealed, evidence buried, stories rewritten to protect the myth of greatness. The empire is gone, but its ghosts linger in every corner, in museums filled with stolen treasures, in statues that still stand tall, in silence that still hides truth. The reckoning has begun, but Britain is not ready to look into the mirror. Decades pass, yet the shadow of empire remains. The colonized carry its scars in poverty and division. The colonizer carries its denial in nostalgia and pride. Children in both worlds inherit the same silence, one born of loss, the other of guilt. But silence cannot last forever. Scholars, artists, and descendants begin to dig, uncovering what was erased. Truth surfaces from the soil of forgotten graves and the pages of forbidden letters. The empire may have fallen, but its story is only now being told. The reckoning is not vengeance, it is remembrance. The people who suffered, who fought, who endured, deserve more than apology. They deserve acknowledgement. History cannot be changed, but it can be told honestly. And in that honesty lies redemption. The empire's monuments may still stand, but so do its survivors, the living proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to light. The empire built on denial has finally met the one force it could never conquer: memory. Decades after the flags came down, the empire lives on, not in palaces or parades, but in the invisible threads that bind nations together. English words cross every ocean. British laws govern distant lands. Trade routes, carved by conquest, still dictate the world's wealth. Yet beneath the surface, the wounds remain. Generations born long after colonial rule still carry its weight. In poverty, in prejudice, in the quiet ache of displacement. The sun may have set on the British Empire, but its light still burns where it should not. Borders drawn by empire continue to bleed. In South Asia, families divided by partitions still live with ghosts of a line inked by strangers. In Africa, artificial nations struggle to balance identities once torn apart for profit. Across the Caribbean, the descendants of enslaved people demand the justice history denied them. The empire's geography was not erased, it was inherited, along with its pain. And so, the world still wrestles with the shape that Britain carved into it. In Britain itself, the legacy is harder to face. Some cling to nostalgia, to the myth of glory, of empire as benevolent. Others demand truth. Streets are renamed, statues debated, archives reopened. The nation stands at a crossroads, to honor its past or to understand it. True reckoning requires courage, the courage to listen, to accept and to remember not what Britain was proud of, but what it refused to see. From Kingston to Kolkata, from Nairobi to New Delhi, artists, writers, and thinkers rise to reclaim their stories. Their voices echo through film, music, and literature, rewriting what empire once erased. They do not seek revenge. They seek remembrance. Each poem, each painting, each melody restores a fragment of what was lost. Through their art, the colonized become creators again, and history, for the first time, begins to heal. The empire's story is not just Britain's. It belongs to everyone it touched. It is a story of suffering, but also of survival. The people it tried to silence became the storytellers. The lands it exploited became nations of strength and pride. The empire sought eternity but found only memory. And memory, unlike empire, belongs to the people. History's final truth is simple. Power fades, but humanity endures. The crown of empire has turned to dust. Yet from that dust, a new world continues to rise.